Welcome to Surviving the Startup. I am Jay, your host, a first-time startup founder straight out of university. Follow along as I explore the stories of entrepreneurs, founders, and VCs who are shaping the future of businesses. I'll be speaking with recent graduates who are breaking the mold and making their mark in the world of startups. From the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey to the lessons learned along the way, we'll be diving deep into the most forward-thinking individuals in the game. So whether you're a recent graduate, an aspiring founder, or VC, or simply someone who loves learning about the inner workings of startups, join me as I embark on a journey to survive the startup. In this episode, we speak with Joe. Joe is a successful previous founder turned excellent VC. We speak about his journey from university to VC and what he looks for in a founder before investing and writing those huge checks. Hey Joe, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I thought it would be good if we start off by hearing a little bit about you and getting a little bit of an introduction of who you are and what you do.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm Joe, investor at Supernode Global. We're a seed stage fund investing in digital content. Um, Before joining Supernode, I was a founder myself, so I was on the other side of the table. I built an on-demand job platform for students within the hospitality sector. At the time, I called it like the Uber for bar jobs. Didn't quite pan out that way, but I ended up moving on after a few years, growing it to about 30,000 students. Um, and yeah, kind of what fell into venture, fortunately, and really enjoyed it over the last year. But yeah, outside of work, London, kind of born and bred, sporty, like I love my football, tennis, started playing paddle recently. And yeah, always been interested in startups and entrepreneurs. Yeah, that's a bit about me, I guess.
Awesome. I'll be excited to hear about paddle because I haven't actually heard anyone play that before.
Oh, it's great. It's good.
But we'll go
It's
into
good.
that. Cool. Um, so you graduated in 2021, studying economics, but during university, you've already mentioned it already, you started StuTemp. Could you give us a little bit more information about what the problem StuTemp were trying to solve, and also a little bit about what led you to starting a startup?
For sure. Yeah, no, I'll answer the latter part of that question. I suppose what drove me to start StuTemp was I don't know, I always felt like university was a good opportunity to start something. You have access to resources, people, a market, i.e., students, and free time, depending on how how hard you go on your studies. And so, yeah, I was like, right, in my first year, kind of got involved with the Loughborough Enterprise Network, who was super helpful, and realized there was a kind of startup fund where you can get grant funding. And yeah, applied for that with a friend who I co-founded it with, and secured some grant money to kind of build the platform. Looking back, like I did as much planning as I thought I needed to, but I think I could have, I don't know, I could have been more specific on certain elements of the product in particular, and who I didn't know. I wasn't a coder, so I didn't know any coders, so I used agencies to build it and things like that. And yeah, I don't know, looking back, I could have maybe streamlined that process a bit. But nevertheless, I started it at the end of first year, going into second year, as essentially an on demand job platform. So, what I realized, one of the problems I had at university was that I didn't want um, a regular kind of shift based job because I didn't know what social commitments I had, sporting commitments, or just general studying. So I wanted a flexible solution to earn a bit of extra cash on campus, ideally, or in the local town, but also being able to still, have do my commitments. And yeah, so I thought, what if I could get on one side of the market a supply of students who have bar experience or some level of working experience looking to work the odd shift. And then on the demand side of the marketplace, could I find within hospitality restaurants and bars on campus and in the local town that needed students to fill the peak kind of busy periods. So after a bit of research, I realized that, and from working at a pub myself, I realized that, you know, pubs and restaurants, bars, whatever, they get really busy at certain times of the day and certain evenings, and some evenings are busier than others, and they can't always plan the rota and schedule to fit that. So they're either understaffed, overstaffed, or about right. So we really wanted to help on the understaffing element. So during those busy periods, they could kind of bring our students in for 2 or 3 hours, work the shift, and then we take care of the legals, the insurance, and all the admin out of it, basically. And yeah, we did that starting off with bars, and kind of went from there. That
And
transitioned. Sorry, gone.
I was going to say, so did you do any of the jobs yourself?
Yeah, no, I did. I did a few. So, and as my co-founder, basically, as you probably know, some students are slightly unreliable, and when you're dealing with a lot, occasionally the odd student would have Saturday morning scaries and pull out of the shift. I assume due to a larger Friday night. And so, yeah, we'd often fill in if we couldn't find another student. And it's fine, but sometimes we were in Loughborough and you'd have to drive like 40 minutes to Nottingham and do a delivery driving shift or something for 3 or 4 hours. And yeah, that was difficult, but we just didn't want to let clients down, basically, who we'd signed up with and promised that we'd get them someone to fill their
100%.
shift.
And how did you get clients to trust you? You're a student. You're a brand new student organization. Students, as you said, are well. We've both been recent students, but students, as you said, are temperamental at best. How did you get these people with work going out there to trust you to come and do the work that was needed?
Mm, good question. I don't. I think first impressions are important. When we spoke with, whether it be the local fish and chip shop or a larger bar, I think it's just important to get across who we were, like personally, in terms of hardworking students ourselves, entrepreneurial things like that, and you kind of build a level of trust over email, etc. And the first few shifts, if you can fill it smoothly and effectively, you sort of build that trust, and it works on both sides, right? Like they need to trust that we can get good students to them, but also we need to trust that they can pay on time. They treat the students well, and don't pull out last minute. So I think, yeah, over time you kind of have core clients that you just build trust and relationships with. But at first, yeah, there's nothing there. So it's a lot about kind of having a social presence on LinkedIn if they want to check you out on the website, but also how you
Yeah.
pitch and present yourselves to sort of these business owners.
And what was the response from the students? Did they enjoy the work they were doing, or was it more just a means to an end?
I don't know. Some of the students, so it depends what the job was. A lot of it was, yeah, bar work or delivery driving during the COVID pandemic, and then
Mm,
on during when things opened up a bit in the summer of 2021, we did a lot of events work, so event stewarding and things like that. And I think it depended on the type of job, but definitely the events side of things. Really, yeah, students enjoyed, mainly because there'd often be 10 or 20 students that we recruited at a time, and so there'd be like the StuTemp gang, and they'd kind of be friends and get on, and that was quite nice to see. But also, if you're at an event
yeah.
that you like, obviously you're at work, but you also get access to, or you can hear the live music, right? So that's always a part of the job. And there's a bit of level of camaraderie and yeah, just friendship
Yeah.
during the 2 or 3 days, because it's like you get there at 7 and you don't leave till 9 or 10. It's a long old day, so you need other students that,
Yeah.
yeah, you're friendly with, I'd say.
And did you do any of the events yourself?
Yeah, so for the events, it's a bit different because we had so many students, maybe 10 to 20, like I said, at a time. It's important for us just to manage that process and be there, just kind of get all our students to meet at the same and coordinate with the other events agencies that we were working with. So, yeah, myself and co founder Tom would do that. And yeah, just be there, just kind of managing the process, which, yeah, was enjoyable, but also felt like we were in it with our students.
100%. That's really cool to hear because when I was at university, I worked at events as well, and one of the most memorable moments I had was we were waiting to do we were just stagehands, right? We were waiting to move and refix a stage at the back, and we were backstage for Skepta, and we were watching him for about 40 minutes. It was honestly one of the best experiences that I've had working. So what was one of your memorable experiences from StuTemp? Like not just
Yeah.
events, but anything. What do you remember and be like that was a funny moment or that was a good moment that was?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think maybe we'll split it into like good, not so good, and funny. So the good moments that um, I remember working in my like dorm in my room, like writing this business plan and stuff to get this grant funding, and like my friends, like housemates, kind of going out to like this D&B sort of like rave thing, and I was like, oh, what am I doing? Like wasting my first year writing up this thing. And then at the end of the first year in the summer, kind of getting the nod that we would get the grant funding and could start something. It was only a small amount of money,
Nice.
around £5,000, but it was more like just it was just reward for that sort of bit of work, and it was the first kind of backing, I suppose, that I'd ever got from
And
the
someone
university.
believed in you, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And yeah, obviously, kind of telling my co-founder, who was a really good mate, and starting that was, yeah, the good moments. The uh, funny slash not so good moments. I remember at one of the events actually. It was a huge event. Can't remember what the name was, but it's on our social somewhere. But basically, the council didn't tell or had messed up the road closures, which meant that people who literally lived the other side of the festival couldn't get to their homes without like a 40-minute drive. Basically, they just drive along this one main road, and within 2 minutes they'd get
Yeah.
to their home. But because that main road was cut off, they had to do like a one-way big like circle, and it actually like it added like 30 to 40 minutes. So obviously it's like 10 p.m. People are coming home from wherever in the morning. They're able to leave, but they get back and they can't get in. And so what started happening was like people were getting really really pissed off basically, and we were like the road closure signs trying to stop people, and unfortunately like people got quite angry and started like mounting the pavements trying to go around us basically. And we kind of just circled the students and were like, right, we've tried. We've got to let them go and just get security in. That's what we did. But it was like
Yeah.
funny after looking back, but also kind of scary because at that time, like it was
Yeah.
like BMWs just 4x4 just paving the road and then
Uh,
coming around you and stuff and
20,
whatnot. But yeah, it was a learning experience for sure.
100%. No, 20 students in in the middle of the night blocking cars can't end well, can it? Um, okay, so obviously StuTemp's come to an end now. Um, Tell me about why you decided to wind things down, and tell me about if you got so many students on board, and it was going well during university, and you're doing all these fun events and getting run over by BMWs. Why why did it come to an end?
Mm. No, it's a good question. I think there's a couple of reasons. Um, I mean, we had good traction. Like we had, like I said, up to 20,000 students on the platform doing decent revenues. But to scale it to the level we required, I felt like we hadn't made enough inroads with students. Like I felt we didn't have enough students on the platform, and as we were graduating ourselves, I just didn't feel like we had enough of a foothold in the Midlands to really kind of bet an early part of my career into it. So that was one element of it, and tied to that, I didn't think the platform itself was quite working the way I wanted it. It was fairly manual. We hadn't quite found a niche. Like we were doing events, delivery driving, the odd bar thing, but
Yep,
it shifted away from the Uber for bar jobs that I mentioned earlier to more just filling in shifts and
yeah,
being a working agency. There was also with delivery driving in
yeah,
particular, insurance and things like that, admin issues, which we kind of you know, covered a little bit, but to do it full time and longer term, we just didn't have the things in place. So it got to a point
Mm-hmm.
after uni where we graduated and we were earning a decent bit of income. And I think we got to like 100K in revenues. We were doing decent levels of income, but the profit margins on that were really low. And that was
Yeah.
another issue financially, metrics wise. So it was a combination of factors. And I think also I was a bit not burnt out because it wasn't really a venture scale business, but I was burnt out doing the same thing and working with students. My co-founder and I sort of lived together at uni, worked together, and I just felt like I needed a new challenge. I also wanted to live abroad for a bit, and I was planning to, but it was still COVID in 2022, so that didn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I sort of carried it on post uni for about a year, just with my co-founder, but it was very maintenance. We were just sending out students that already had existing clients, and we weren't really doing any extra BD or things like that. And it just slowly kind of, as you can imagine, grounded to a halt. Clients sort of were moving on, or students were graduating. We weren't recruiting enough. So yeah, it came to a nice natural end where we had a decent bit of money at the end of it, and a whole bunch of experiences, and that kind of led me into to Supernode, I guess, which was on the other side of the table was a VC firm.
Exactly. So perfect transition. We'll go into Supernode. So finish uni, wind down StuTemp. You switched over to the dark side from our founders to VC funds. So tell us a little bit about Supernode and tell us about your role there.
For sure. I actually want to add about StuTem and the ending of it. It was a difficult decision. Like I made it sound like there was a lot of negatives. There was a lot of positives. Like I enjoyed working with my co-founder. We had something going, but I just, like I said, felt like there was more against it than to it, and I wanted a new challenge. But it was a difficult decision, and like one that took time to come to, and emotionally sort of drained me a bit. Deciding what to do.
On that point of view, the emotional and closing it down. And I faced the exact same thing when I was at university. Before starting Fabrio, I had another startup that I started. And it was probably more of a business rather than a startup. But you put so much effort and time into these like businesses, and you literally pour blood, sweat, and tears, like sitting in your dorm room. And I've been through the exact same thing. All my flatmates are going out tonight, but I wasn't because I was sitting writing some plan which probably is dusty, and I don't even remember writing or whatever the title was. But it's those experiences which have got us to where we are today, and I think that's really awesome. And I don't think I would change anything about what I did. And I think that's probably the same with you as well, and which is why I led you into Supernode.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I completely agree. And yeah, so Supernode, we're, as I mentioned, the seed fund, investing strictly in digital content. So essentially anything that helps to create, distribute, monetize, and also the consumption with content. So kind of within the main verticals of content being audio, video, gaming, and mixed reality, which when I was applying, I thought was a super interesting focus area. And to be honest, I didn't know too much about the VC landscape. But what I've come to learn is there's a lot of generalists and like B2B funds, which are cool funds, but just not areas that I'm super interested by. And content, I'm passionate about consuming content myself, whether that be podcasts, books, films, whatever. And then coming from a slightly creative background, my dad being an actor and also a painter, I felt like content creation and things like that suited me. So yeah, made that transition in late 2021 as an intern initially. So they I think they were looking for someone with a bit more experience, but they liked me during the interviews. Said we can see how you get on for a few months, and then offer you a full time role if it comes to that. And after a few months, which I enjoyed, but also stressed myself out a bit too much about the future, to be honest. Got a longer term opportunity, and yeah, I've been there about a year full time from January this time last year.
Awesome. And you mentioned something about different funds being more generalist and Supernode being very niche down. And you've given your background about why that niche. But when you're looking at funds when you first started and you're looking, okay, right, I want to go into VC, why were you drawn to being able to focus on one particular area rather than being a generalist?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also be honest. Like, I had heard about VC, and I'd had a year in private equity as an analyst, but it's too corporate for me. But I wasn't like, right, I want to do VC. Like, that's my goal. It kind of just came about just looking for opportunities. But in terms of once I saw that there were opportunities for young, because I didn't know younger people could go into VC, to be honest. Once I realized that there were a few opportunities for people with different experiences to join VC, I think picking a specialist fund just gives you the opportunity to be quite knowledgeable about certain sectors. And if you're interested in those areas, like I was, then yeah, you just kind of, I don't know, it felt like a natural pull for me to join a fund that focuses on those areas. And yeah, learning about a whole bunch of new technologies like Web3 and the metaverse and things like that was, I found, super compelling. Even in the noise and hype and stuff. So yeah, no, I think the area of focus for me was definitely a pull towards Supernode, and it's the same for founders that we invest in. Like, we focus on that sphere, and we have a sphere of influence and network, and I think it's a value add as well as the money.
What would you look for in a founder? Say if a founder came to you today with their pitch deck, and what would you pick out with given your experience?
Yeah, I mean, firstly on the pitch deck stuff, a lot of my job is reviewing decks, and yeah, I have a bunch of tips and things like that about putting a deck together, which I can wax lyrical about. But in terms of founders, I think like there's some characteristics which you just have to have as a founder, and for me, it's kind of hard work and motivation. And it sounds like very, it's been said before, but I think those founders that are just hustling constantly without burning themselves out, it's very important, obviously, to be kind of emotionally, physically, spiritually balanced. But you want founders, and I was the same when I did StuTemp. You want founders thinking about the problem they're solving, the issue, like all the time, and trying, just working incredibly hard. And not everyone can do it. Like, I frankly don't know if I have it in me to focus on a problem so much focus for years and years and years. It's a difficult thing to do. I think you're also looking for someone you can work with and emphasize with. So just kind of like someone you can offer feedback and they'll listen, and vice versa. They're not scared to give you feedback as a fund as well. That's definitely something, I've been on calls, especially as a younger VC, where, and I get it, if you're an older founder, like, why would you speak to an analyst? But at the same time, analysts, like, their job is literally to analyze first calls and decks, and if you build a good relationship, then there's every chance you progress to the next step. And so founders who are smart and understand that building the relationship early on is important. That's also something I look for. And then yeah, it depends what sector you're in. But if, for example, within Web3 and blockchain, you're looking for someone that is a native, right? Like, understands the space deeply, doesn't have to work in the space, but like has been in communities, or has been writing about it, or just like gets the problem and the area of focus that they're working in really, really deeply, and has
Mm,
just deep domain expertise, is super important.
yeah.
And then obviously, little things, well, not little things, but things that you kind of look for on paper, if you like, are kind of startup experience, whether they're first time, second time founders, or if they've worked in the space that they're sort of operating in.
That's a really good point about not having to burn out, and founders who understand they work hard, they can build those relationships and be a people person. I think that's a really good point that I see a lot of founders miss sometimes. Especially when being burnt out as well. Founders can work themselves to the bone, but sometimes realize that it's not all about that. Sometimes by taking a step back, you actually have some of your best ideas. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And we've definitely positioned ourselves to be that emotional support that founders might need. Like, we want to be the first call, and like, if you need to take a step back, like, we want to help you kind of analyze the reasons why, and just support you in your journey, whether that be, full steam ahead or just needing some time to, not burn out.
And I think that also goes back to what I really like about Supernode as well as a VC. Um, so for example, Joe, you and I met because you rejected my pitch deck, right? And when I found my company, I sent my pitch deck across. You rejected it, but we jumped on a call and you gave your time up to me, and we got some I got some feedback from you, and we've remained friends since. And that's something that I also really like seeing my investor, which we're with now. So we're with Twinkle Hive. Um, and they're great, exactly like you. I'll have weekly calls with them. They'll be my first call if I've got something that I need a question on. And I really enjoy that founder to investor relationship, and I think it's changing. I think that's where people stand out because we're building a company together. Like as much as it give you your money and walk away, it's not like that. You should take that vested interest, right? Um, so with you looking at people every single day, you're also looking at decks on a day to day basis. How many decks would you say you review in a day?
I'd say on average, I don't know, maybe 7 to 8 a day. And maybe one or two I'll look at more deeply and kind of, I reckon I have, a couple of calls a day with startups, from just looking at decks. So yeah, I don't know. I get through a lot. I see a lot, and as investors, we don't have 20 minutes to look at a deck. It's very much, unfortunately, our time is scarce. So we just have to make a decision whether we're going to progress or have feedback fairly quickly from looking through a deck.
And after seeing so many decks, what would you say the biggest top tip you've got for a founder who's putting their deck together right now?
I think just try and boil it down and don't overdo it. Like like I said, we like investors just, if your investor has to really think about a solution. Okay, maybe if it's deep tech, it's different, but for a consumer solution or whatever, or even like for your business, Jay, like there obviously there's complexity to it, but the more you can boil it down and make it simple for an investor to understand a few key things like the problem you're solving, what the solution is, and most importantly, what the product is. Like, is it a web platform? Is it an app? Like, just really laying out in like soup. Like, imagine you're explaining it to your mum or like a 6-year-old, but in a nice, visually appealing 10 to 15 pages. Like, it's all about giving the information you have to give to an investor for them to understand what the opportunity is, but not overdoing it. And then, if anything, you want to underdo it because they'll come back with questions. They might just want to answer them in a call, but you want to get the key facts. So, for example, like I said, problem, solution, what the product is, some traction, team backgrounds, size of the market, and a few other bits. But it doesn't need to be several pages on how big the market is or the market trends or things like that. It's just really a slide per point, is fine. And you want to put it across where it's not too wordy and visually appealing.
And looking at some decks as well, what are some of the red flags you've seen on some of them? Have you seen any which stand out and be like, yeah, no, 100% not, or
I think red flags, I don't know, things that I don't like in decks or things that I find frustrating is when an entrepreneur won't has got so into the weeds they haven't explained what the product actually is, or they just include a
yeah,
video to the product demo or things like that without explaining it, because it shows a couple of things. Firstly, that maybe they either haven't thought about explaining it in a simple way, which for something like B2B SaaS is really important for selling, but generally you want to be
mm.
able to take employees with you, share, be able to communicate a vision, and if you can't communicate the product in a few sentences, then it's a worry. um, Other red flags, I don't know. It's very much depending on the deck and the startup, but obviously anything too wordy again just isn't going to be helpful. I've seen some startups ask to sign NDAs before sending a deck. Again, you're just adding a friction barrier that,
Yeah,
frankly, investors don't
yeah,
have time to think about. Teaser decks, I don't really like as in 1 2 page decks. It doesn't really give me enough. I want 10 to 15
yeah.
pages of high quality, visually appealing slides that I can make a decision on whether it's our fit, our focus, our fund, whatever. And yeah, so that there's probably a few things.
obviously you're rejecting a lot of decks, and that's typical for a VC, right? But and they get a lot of applications, they got a lot of decks, and they've got to sift through. And half the time, founders haven't done their research and realized that actually this VC isn't for me, in terms of the VC's
Mm.
niche, in terms of their scope of investment. So, how does it make you feel when you have to say no to people? Have you how obviously that's an interesting thing.
Yeah,
You're saying I can help you, but
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, a red flag is when a founder reaches out and it's like a B2B SaaS industrial tool or something. And it's just like super irrelevant to what we focus on as a fund. It just shows that the startup hasn't done their research on the fund. That's actually a key thing I would say if
yeah,
you're looking for fundraising, like make sure you do the research on the fund when you approach them. I know there's going to be mass outreach and you want to speak to as many funds as possible, but honestly, 10 targeted emails at funds that are relevant is better than 100 mass emails at irrelevant funds. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, in terms of like saying no, I always try and put myself in the entrepreneur's shoes and think what valuable feedback or what would I want from this investor if it's not a progression to another call or next step, what can I offer back? And often it's just a few comments on the deck, like we did, Jay, just jumping on a call if the entrepreneur really wants one and just wants to kind of chat and speak through about how to improve their deck, connections and intros to other investors who might be more relevant. I've done that often. And then, if it's too early, we also have a community here of pre-seed startups. And if I think it's interesting, I'll
yeah,
send it to the community's way and kind of track their progress and keep them in the Supernode family ahead of their seed. There's a few different things, but
yeah,
when I first joined, definitely saying no, I think was difficult. Like I wasn't sure how to structure it or like how to feel. Or, you'd be saying no to experienced entrepreneurs for whatever reason, and it feels like you feel a bit like an imposter, right? But I think it's just
yeah.
natural and come to terms with that. But definitely at the beginning stages, as an early VC, like first kind of, I suppose, full time job out of uni, like you do feel a bit like an imposter. And I wrote a bit about
Hmm.
that when I first joined about a year ago, actually.
Yeah, so I read that article actually. It was a really interesting take. I'll link it in wherever links go in this podcast, for people
Yeah,
to take a
there's
look at if
before
they're
AI as
interested in
well.
get into VC.
It was before
Before
AI
AI.
came out.
So you actually put the
So
graft into it, you put the work into it with the content.
exactly.
So, given what you've learnt now over the past year and a bit at Supernode, if you went back and ran StuTemp again, and knowing what you know now, would you do anything majorly different?
Yeah, I think I took a lot of learnings from StuTemp, and then whilst being at Supernode, I've seen a lot of stuff that I would take back if I was to go back and change things. But in all honesty, like I don't think I would change anything at StuTemp just because I'm a firm believer that you learn from your experiences, and yeah, I needed to just make mistakes and whatnot and come to decisions and stuff like that. And yeah, like I wouldn't go back and change anything, but there's definitely things if I had to, or if like whatever, this is hypothetically, there's things I would change based on just yeah my experience at StuTemp, but also Supernode, what I've seen with startups, working with startups, um, and the main thing is just validating demand early on, like just validate the hypothesis before you build anything. Just get feedback and understand that people want what you're doing before you invest time, money, and resources into it.
Definitely, definitely. Um, awesome. So it sounds like your journey at Supernode is really interesting, great learning experience, and it's moving forwards as well. There's a lot of scope for growth, I think, within VC and especially the Web3 space. It's really exciting. Have you got any thoughts on what your plans are next? Have you got any goals that you've set yourself?
Yeah, I'm very goal driven. I got a few things I want to do at Supernode this year. Sort of yeah, investing obviously, but also just generally developing thinking around theses and building my network and stuff like that. All the kind of classic stuff. But I think yeah, this year also yeah, I just want to enjoy it, and I'm very grateful for the being in VC and just yeah, just kind of keep working hard and seeing where it takes me. So yeah, yeah, few different goals, I suppose. I'll share the personal ones offline.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Um, okay, so this brings me on to the final section, and I just want to ask about first look. So you started something up recently around the content focus, and it's basically giving an insight into startups. And that's something personally as a founder, I love getting my teeth into and reading content and listening to other founders because the biggest thing for me, it just shows that everyone's in the same boat in some way or another. And everyone's faces basically the same problems, just in a different layout. So, what is First Look?
First Look is a monthly Substack that I publish, where I basically have conversations with startups that are raising either pre-seed or seed in our digital content kind of sphere. And yeah, it's like an hour conversation that I break down into snippets, and the idea is to give them exposure to investors in my network, other people interested in startups, and yeah, just break it down into the key kind of sections that you would go through on a first call, hence the name. And yeah, it started off as a monthly Substack, and then the most recent one, I kind of did a newsletter, but also published the whole conversation as a sort of podcast version.
Yep.
So yeah, I suppose right now it's a newsletter and podcast, but the goal is really to make introductions for exciting companies that we might not have invested in,
Mm.
or might have invested in, but nevertheless want to kind of get intros for and connect with my network.
That sounds really awesome. I think you're the first person I've ever seen do that kind of layout. And if you haven't seen First Look yet, go take a look at it. But there's a little podcast snippet with like a minute, 2 minute insight. And then there's the written section, which I really enjoy because it breaks it down into those questions. And maybe you don't want to listen and don't to a whole podcast. Maybe you don't have the time, but you can really get into what you need to listen to. Um, what was your motivation for starting it?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that obviously the creator economy is an area that we invest in. And yeah, I wanted to be a creator, right? Like I wanted to write and publish stuff that was related to work. So yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons. But also, I felt like there not necessarily a gap in the market, but you as VCs you get deal flow newsletters, and they're great for like, meeting companies. But if you want to do something a bit more in depth, or yeah, something you can kind of refer to ahead of a first call with a company, or even at a later stage during DD, I felt like this was a good way to get information across. And then finally, yeah, just get exposure to really interesting founders and startups that I've worked with in our space, and just leverage the network that I've built the last kind of year, and just try and connect people who are relevant.
Awesome, awesome. And we're coming to the end now, so I've got one final question to round everything up. So to to give you, if you were to give advice to a student just graduating university, looking to either get into VC or potentially a startup, I know you're gonna be more VC focused. What would you tell them? What would your advice be?
Yeah, no, it's a difficult question. I think whilst there are roles that are emerging for younger people in VC, it's still not the common thing. So don't be disheartened if you just don't have enough experience, or whatnot. There's other routes into the space, but I would say it's changing, and I think on the most for the it's a good thing, because previously it was investment bankers and consultants and who go into venture, and they make great investors. But it's nice to have diversity with founders, previous founders, or people just involved in the startup scene. So yeah, join a startup that really grabs you, or that you think you believe in the mission and what they're doing. And that's one way. And then you can kind of maybe start looking at venture role that you've got a few years at a high scale, high speed, sort of high scale startup. Um, and then another one, yeah, you can go the traditional route, consulting, banking, and then get into VC. And obviously that wasn't really my route, but yeah, that's a tried and tested path. But yeah, I'd say it's very competitive, and it takes ages if you want to get into venture to do it. So don't be disheartened. If it's something you want to do, you will get there. Just keep going. And in the meantime, yeah, learn about startups, speak with people, reach out to people like me, and like have chats and stuff like that, because there's no harm in just building a network early on.
Awesome. That's a great piece of advice. Um, Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on and thank you for sharing your experience. I think it's going to be very useful for people who are looking to get into VC and startups. Um, yeah, you got any final thoughts you want to add?
No, man, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And yeah, if you're raising in the digital content economy, pre-seed or seed, feel free to reach out. Always keen to see a deck and try and offer valuable feedback and have a chat.